Good morning, everybody. So without stating the obvious, what does it mean for fines, other than we have a lot of fines? A14 definitely was a case in point, and HS2 is, yeah, that's my future. So I'll just go through what does a lot of fines mean. So just a little bit of quantification as to what we had on the A14 and what sort of considerations had to be made when writing the UPD. So I joined the A14 looking at Emma's timescale. I was in your focused analysis phase. So the UPD was written by the time I joined, just pre-COVID. So I had a few months to get my head around the project, and then we all went into lockdown. And then three key points, which looks like I haven't got a lot to say, but I have. And consistency, I think, is the word of the day. Emma's already covered this. Michael will cover it, I'm sure. It's going to come up throughout the day. So these are the three things that I think things went well on the A14. We learnt how we could maybe do it differently next time. And just the scale of the HS2 project means we really do have to think about things differently in a lot of areas. So this is A14. The pictures are not from the A14, but the numbers are. So pottery, we had just over 3 tons of pottery. Nearly 1.5 tons of CBM, registered fines, coins, iron nails, just a lot of fines. So we had to work out how we were going to fit all that in the narrow timescale of analysis that Emma mentioned earlier. But a lot of fines also means a lot of specialists. So we had a lot of different people, a lot of pottery specialists, a lot of material specialists, all working on the same stuff at the same time. So we have material specialists, we have period specialists, we have regional specialists, and lots of data. So I'll just go through a few of these areas, how we approached it on the A14 and what we might think about doing a bit differently. So stratigraphic engagement. Again, stating the obvious, we want to talk about the fines in relation to the stratigraphy, not the fines in isolation and then the site in isolation. So trying to get that engagement and that narrative as we go along. So basically, it's the order in which we do things. How do we approach it? So if the stratigraphic work's completed, then that allows the analysis of the fines to be targeted on the key points and the interesting bits. But then if there's a stratigraphic review, then you have to go back to the fines reporting and data and make those changes if anything gets rephased. And that means double handling of the data and reporting. So not ideal. And also constraints time. Every project has a time scale. Everyone's talked this morning about a deadline, a time. We have to deliver it by this point. So is there time to do the strat work and then do the fines work and then go back to the strat review and then write the fines reports? Possibly not. But how do we get that all working concurrently with everybody working together? And communication is the key. So as Emma mentioned before, we just had engagement all the way through, and the online platform was the way we could do that. Everything was accessible and everybody could see that. So one thing we did, and what I think is absolutely vital, is an onboarding. Get everybody on board, speak to everybody at the beginning of the project. It was very obvious on the A14 which areas maintained that communication right the way through with all the specialists, and those were absolutely the most successful parts of the stratigraphic analysis when all the specialists had interacted and engaged throughout the process. So it's just facilitating that, making it easy, and then keeping it going. It's all very well doing an onboarding process, and this is all very exciting. We've got all these wonderful things to look at, and then stepping away and leaving them to it. You've got to keep the engagement going. And then on to our favourite subject. Oh, sorry, construction of narratives. That comes into it. I forgot about that bit. Of course, the whole thing is constructing these narratives and getting everyone together. Not just the pottery specialists or the fine specialists, but the enviro and the stratigraphy and the dating and everybody talking. So you're all writing the same story, essentially. Consistency of data. So this is my current little challenge, isn't it, on HS2 at the moment, that despite recording, reporting guidance, toolkits, best practices, there is methodological variation between and within disciplines. There is so many ways that a pottery specialist can record data, even though there are toolkits showing how the data should be recorded. An example from the Rural Settlement Project, there's a whole discussion there as to how difficult it was to incorporate the Roman pottery data into that synthesis because of the inconsistency in classification, in quantification, in just naming things. So consistency in the data is key, but how do we get that in at the beginning? And obviously the bigger the project, the more specialists you've got. So just for pottery on the A14, we had 14 different specialists just for one material type. And the only way we could possibly get them all doing the same thing was to devise a fabric and a form series. Now, yes, there's the National Roman Fabric Reference Collection, which was the basis of the fabric series for the A14. And then we devised codes for all the regional, local, the new products that we found from the kiln, the kilns out on the Brampton West area. We devised form codes and decoration codes, and then devised an input into the Oracle database so every vessel could be individually recorded. And that is absolutely crucial. And I think the most important thing there and the biggest learn there is make it easy to put the data in. Because if that's frustrating, then people just switch off and they don't engage with it. So it has to be straightforward. So there was a whole new system devised, but then there was a step-by-step guidance document of how to enter all of the data. And because we persevered with that, it made getting the data out and interrogating it so much easier. And Emma's already mentioned these. So we had these scheme-wide method statements, but also within the fines section, there was a reporting strategy, there was a reporting template and a guidance document of what we were trying to get out of that fines data at the end. And it just kept everybody focused. But that meant at the end, the project-wide synthesis was so much easier because all the reports were on the same format. Everyone was talking about the same narratives and approaching things the same way. And that then made it so much easier to compare one site within the sites, separate settlements, the separate adjacent sites, and then the project as a whole, the scale of the project. But it meant we could compare assemblages and write the material overviews at the end of the project as well. And then one thing Emma also mentioned this morning, sampling strategies. So the scale of the project was such that we could not analyse 100% of material for every material type. So decisions had to be made as to what we could look at in full detail, and where we were going to do a sampling strategy, have a robust methodology as to how we were going to reduce the amount of material that we were going to look at. Because obviously every project has constraints. You have time and you have a budget. And to be able to do that, we just had to sit down and come up with these strategies. So for the A14, the biggest one was the pottery. We had over 3 tons of pottery. There was no way we could analyse all of that in the time frame that we had. So for the Iron Age and Romano-British pottery, we decided, looking at the project budgets, the timescales, that we could look at 60% of that material. But it wasn't going to be just an arbitrary 60%, it had to be a focused methodology. And that included wish lists of key research aims that we had, key themes and topics that ran through the whole project, one of which was the Iron Age Romano-British transition and being able to identify that in the pottery assemblage. And then there had to be a volumetric part of this. We had to get to the 60%. So we were looking at key context, key parts of the sites. And it was a lot of back and forth to get that to work across the scheme. But then, as we mentioned earlier, one of our master's students took one of our areas. We did 60% of pottery and they analysed the 40%, and then we compared the results. And it was a good test of how our sampling strategy had worked and whether it was giving us a representative sample of the whole assemblage. And it was really positive. The results were really, really positive at the end, that the 60% results and 100% results were very comparable. So we had hit on the right strategy for dealing with that pottery. But again, it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution. And going forward, we're not necessarily going to apply blanket policies across the whole project. So there's always a threshold. You always know how much time you've got and how much material you've got, but how you decide what you look at is just going to have to be thought about, I think, in a bit more detail. We're not going to apply a blanket policy across the whole of HS2, for example. There are lots of things that we do need to consider, not necessarily based on volume. I think I've got a list and there's etc. at the bottom, because I think we've got a lot of conversations to have about this. So it could be site specific, it could be thematic, it could be period based, it could be material based, research focused. There are so many things that we need to think about. And that is my future. So the theme of the CIFA conference is the future of archaeology. And I have one picture to show you what our future looks like. And that's currently that. Lots and lots of things, lots and lots of very exciting conversations to have about how we are going to tackle the very big assemblage that we have from HS2. And hopefully be able to, I think we want one of those, Charlotte, and that's your challenge in the archive.
A little bit more lighting?
No, you don't need lighting. No, absolutely not. Yeah. So exciting times ahead in terms of finds. We've learned a lot of very valuable lessons from the E14, and a lot of which can be applied to the next stage.
Perfect. Thanks, Sarah.